Now let's move on to transportation, a big issue for our businesses. Kay Khan famously advocated for funding and rebuilding Newton's commuter rail stations. How would you approach advocating and working towards a solution to the lack of funding for the station's redesign? And let's start with Vlad.
Well, whether it's the MBTA or the commuter rail, it has been a failure any which way you slice it. We need to start with the complete and total reworking of how these operations are running, because every election cycle we have a conversation about the MBTA or the commuter rail, and still our train stations are not in compliance with the ADA rules and regulation. How is that possible that a semi-state run organization is not in compliance with laws that are on the books already, and with basically budgets which are swollen with money, and every year it's not enough? So it's a failed operation. It needs to be revamped or somehow privatized. I'm not sure exactly how yet, but there's a big problem there, and it's not providing a service to the people who are using it, and it's really not that affordable. The commuter rail is fairly expensive for people to get to. If you live somewhere by Lowell or Lawrence, and you're trying to get on the commuter rail, it's costing you about $400 a month. That is a large sum of money for something that works sporadically and doesn't provide the service that it needs to do.
I would like to say that the commuter rail is partially privatized right now, but how would you approach funding the stations? It's a huge issue for businesses in those areas, Newtonville included. How can we work with the federal government to help fund these stations redesigns?
If it were possible to have more community involvement and for people who support the enterprise to help improve the infrastructure by private donations, if that were a possibility, I think that would be a better way to go, because that would also provide people agency in how these operations are run in their communities. So instead of general taxation of everybody who's willing or not willing, I think community engagement and community funding may be one of the ways to do that, where people would actually have oversight of the money that's being spent on stations and so on and so forth. That way people would have a lot more to say and have a direct control over the funds. I don't think these people should be trusted with people's money. I'm sorry. Year in and year out, they waste so much. It's incredible.
Thank you. And Amy, how would you approach funding these stations redesign?
So again, it's a real conundrum, right? I mean, KCON has been at it for what, 25 of her 30 years that she's been on the at the State House trying to get these commuter rail stations upgraded and made accessible. So yes, I believe in working with Jake Auchincloss, Congressman Auchincloss, to put pressure on the federal government to go and kick in the funds that have been promised to the residents of Newton for many, many years to get these stations upgraded. As Vlad pointed out, they are inaccessible. They are in violation of ADA regulations. Absolutely. One thing that we did as a community, we went through a very divisive rezoning of our to comply with the MBTA communities law, and the state now needs to hold up its bargain to make sure that they provide accessible, reliable transportation and frequent transportation to these residents in exchange for the density that we've approved. So I put pressure not only on the federal government, but also on the state government. Look, one thing that did not happen in this particular term was that I believe that there was a promise to put at least the Newtonville commuter rail station in the transportation CIP, and it was not there, right? So again, the more pressure that we can put on our state and federal government to fund these stations, the better. So I'll be there to advocate and fight for it. I'm really ticked off about that.
Thank you. Vlad, you were talking about reworking the MBTA, and there will be an opportunity to do that this year. The MBTA is facing a fiscal cliff in the next year, and it will eventually have to cut service and be a lot worse than it is now if Beacon Hill does not intervene. How would you attempt to tackle this issue, and what revenue stream changes would you consider for the T? And let's start with Vlad.
To be honest with you, I don't know. I really don't know as to how to tackle this problem in particular. It is as Amy just said, it is a conundrum, and is a black hole. The MBTA is always on the precipice of some kind of a collapse, and we're always under threat of cutting services. Why? I don't know. But I would love to investigate further how they are operating, how much money they're spending, where the money is going, and what we as lawmakers can do on Beacon Hill to actually force the proper management of this organization, and make it comply with the budgets and make things work on the amount of money that they've been getting so far. Because each time we increase, the revenues going to the MBTA, and each time it's a failure. But my answer to you, truly, I have no idea. For me to even speculate at this point in time would be, I don't know, disingenuous at best.
Amy, now some people say that in the last 2 years, the MBTA has been under the best leadership it's been in a while. However, this fiscal cliff still remains. What revenue streams would you consider for the T in order to help it back together?
Sure. Thank you for mentioning that. Philly has done a tremendous job, and I think we've already seen improvements. I mean, yes, there have been delays, and there have been many repairs and closures in order to upgrade our systems, but I think we've seen a market improvement in terms of the service that the T is providing. I think there are a couple of ways that we could increase our investments into public transit. First off, we've got the Fair Share Amendment, right? The Fair Share Amendment does provide that the monies raised can go to public education as well as public transit. So I think we have those funds that are available. I think we can look at our excise taxes, our registration fees. We can look at a gas tax. We can look at congestion pricing. We can look at tolls. We can look at development impact fees, right? Particularly for those development projects that are near public transit. So I think those are ways to get some funds, much needed funds to invest in our rest of our system. One thing I definitely do think that we do need to do, I mean, we're going to need to electrify our system, right? We're going to need to make sure, because transportation sector is one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to have to, again, make our service much more reliable. We're going to have to make it more frequent if we're going to meet our climate action goals, because we want people to get out of their single use occupancy vehicles and get onto public transit. And in order to do that, we have to make them more frequent, more reliable, and extremely accessible. So we have to look at those ways. Sorry.
That's okay. Vlad, you had a quick response?
Yeah, everything Amy just rattled off, all these things that she wants us to be taxed at. Sorry, Amy, I didn't mean to come across as rude, but everything you mentioned means more money coming out of a working poor's pocket. We're going to make them destitute if we do that. And if we try to electrify our grid any further, we would need to install all new grid. We don't have that capacity in our grid to electrify anything any further. And, you know, that just means that we're burning fossil fuels someplace else. That doesn't take us off of fossil fuels just because we electrify here. We're burning coal someplace else, not too far away.
Thank you.